Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Fighting between Israel and Hamas intensified on Monday as UN Security Council ambassadors visit Egypt's Rafah border crossing. A Palestinian American analyst talks about the desperate situation facing Palestinian civilians in Gaza as the UN sounds an alarm on a possible complete breakdown of public order. And delegates at the UN Climate Conference approved funds to mitigate the effects of climate change in developing nations. VOA's Paul Ndiho speaks with an expert. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Hamas said it was striking back against Israel forces across Gaza on Monday, and Palestinians and international relief agencies said public order was disintegrating as hunger spreads, fueling fears of a mass exodus to Egypt. Video obtained by Reuters showed on Monday sounds of gunfire and explosions echoing through Jabalia, Gaza, as plumes of smoke rose into the sky. Fighting between Israel and Hamas intensified across Gaza, fueling fears flagged by the United Nations at the weekend of a breakdown in public order and a mass exodus of Palestinians into Egypt. The narrow coastal strip has been under a full Israeli blockade since the start of the conflict more than 2 months ago, and the border with Egypt is the only other way out. Most of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been driven from their homes, and residents say it is impossible to find refuge in the densely populated enclave, with around 1,800 people already killed and conflict intensifying. UN Security Council envoys spoke of unimaginable suffering and urged an end to the war in the Gaza Strip on Monday as they headed across Egypt's Sinai Peninsula to the Rafah crossing, the besieged Palestinian enclave's only entry point for aid. The informal one-day trip organized by the United Arab Emirates and Egypt comes amid a spiraling humanitarian crisis in war-torn Gaza, described as a graveyard by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Around a dozen ambassadors are taking part in the visit from countries including Russia and the United Kingdom. But the United States, which Friday vetoed a proposed Security Council demand for an immediate ceasefire as Israeli tanks and troops press an invasion, did not send a representative. For more on the impact of the more than 2 months fighting between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, I sought the perspective of a Palestinian American analyst, Dana El-Koud, a senior non-resident fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, and began by asking her reaction to the United Nations' concern of a possible breakdown of public order in Gaza.
Yeah, I think that Secretary Antonio Guterres, the reason he is taking this step is because of the ongoing inaction, particularly by Israel's allies, and them providing cover for what's happening. And just the scope of the destruction and devastation we're seeing in Gaza, I think necessitates a larger reaction. My understanding of, given the Security Council and how the UN functions, my understanding is that this may not change much in terms of UN policy or decisions, but it could muster a significant amount of aid and start particular mechanisms around that. And so, yeah, it's definitely maybe a little too late, in fact, for this declaration.
And the United States is also calling on Israel to limit civilian deaths and displacement, saying too many Palestinians have been killed when it pounded much of Gaza City and also the northern part of Gaza. Is it possible to identify who is a civilian and place them in designated safe zones, or are there other options to keep civilians safe?
Really, the only option to keep civilians safe is for there to be a ceasefire and to begin political negotiations around hostages, around all the other issues that have spurred this latest escalation of violence. Because the fact of the matter is, this is a militant group, right, that is embedded in a civilian population. And there's lots of reporting to suggest by 972 Mag and others that it doesn't seem that the Israeli side necessarily cares about minimizing civilian deaths and civilian casualties. The point, it seems, given this investigation that I'm citing, it seems to just be about generating the greatest number of targets. So even if they're targeting someone who is not that important, the scope of civilian deaths is really tangential to that decision. So as you mentioned, there's been close to 20,000, maybe even more, Palestinians have been killed in the last 2 months, and over 80% of the entire population of the Gaza Strip has been displaced. And even when Palestinians are told to go into particular safe zones, those safe zones are again bombed. So there's really not a way to minimize civilian death given the method of warfare that Israel is undertaking, including, as I said, generating this great amount of targets using AI, using these new technologies, without a political negotiation. So that's where we need to go.
But one would say it's because the civilians are being caught in this crossfire because of the Hamas terrorists who are disguising themselves and hiding among civilians.
I mean, whether or not that's the case, I think that, we need to look at the evidence of how Hamas is conducting itself, and there may be evidence to suggest this or anything else. There is international law that needs to be applied. It doesn't even matter how many militants there happen to be. There are rules of engagement around hospitals, around ambulances, around schools, and these have been completely flouted.
Again, then we heard from the State Department that there is a designation of 13 individuals and entities responsible for providing funds generated from the sale of shipment of Iranian commodities to the Houthis in Yemen. What influence does this group, the Houthis, have on the Israel-Hamas war?
So the Houthis and a group like Hezbollah, for example, these kinds of militant groups that exist in the region that are funded and supported by Iran, they attempt to capitalize on these kinds of escalations of violence, to pursue their own interests, to pursue Iran's interests. They obviously won't have much impact in helping actual Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. They are really weaponizing these moments. But what they can have an impact on is generating a greater, wider and regional escalation that we really should think to avoid.
That was Dana El-Kurd, a Palestinian-American analyst and senior non-resident fellow at the Arab Center in Washington. Amid growing criticism over its continued support of Israel's military operation in Gaza, the United States defended its stance Sunday, but also reiterated the importance of protecting Palestinian civilians. Veronica Balderas Iglesias reports.
More forcefully, with intensity. That's how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described Sunday the advances of his troops in Gaza.
In order to achieve all our goals, the elimination of Hamas, the return of all our abductees, and the promise that Gaza will never again be a threat to Israel.
Netanyahu also thanked the United States for vetoing a UN Security Council resolution last week that would have called for an immediate ceasefire. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken explained the decision when interviewed Sunday on ABC's This Week show.
With Hamas still alive, still intact, and again, with the stated intent of repeating October 7th again and again and again, that would simply perpetuate the problem.
As Blinken stressed the importance of providing Israel the support and weapons it needs to defend itself, he made it clear it is not without conditions.
Those rules apply to Israel as they do to any other country, including the way they're used and the imperative of respecting international humanitarian law.
But as the civilian death toll continues to rise in Gaza, the United States stance has been strongly criticized at the Doha Forum, which is held every year to discuss world challenges.
It's not up to Israel only. It is those who have given the Israelis the greenest of the green light to continue killing the Palestinians.
In the United States, we had a very blunt conversation with Secretary Blinken. All of us, the Arab and Muslim delegation, were very clear. Our priorities are set. Stop the aggression, allow sufficient humanitarian supplies into all parts of Gaza, ensure protection of civilians.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, also a forum participant, said he'll continue appealing for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. And from Geneva, the chief of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, warned about the impact the war is having on the health environment in the Gaza Strip.
As more and more people move to a smaller and smaller area, overcrowding, combined with the lack of adequate food, water, shelter, and sanitation, are creating the ideal conditions for disease to spread.
He noted his organization has deployed teams to support health workers on the ground who are physically and mentally exhausted. Verónica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Egyptians began voting Monday on the second day of a presidential election in which President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi faces no serious challenger and is certain to win another term, keeping him in power until 2030. The three-day vote is taking place amid a staggering economic crisis in Egypt, a country of 105 million people in which nearly a third live in poverty, according to official figures.
I'm doing my electoral duty as an Egyptian citizen who cares about his country, its stability, and the course of success that all Egyptians inside the country are seeking.
The crisis stems from mismanagement of the economy, but also from the repercussions of the coronavirus pandemic and the ongoing Russian war in Ukraine, which rattled the global economy. The election also has been overshadowed by the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. Almost all of the attention of Egyptians has been on the war on their country's eastern borders and the suffering of Palestinian civilians in the coastal enclave. West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, on Sunday set up a committee of 3 leaders to negotiate with Niger's military junta on a transition to democratic rule and to consider easing sanctions. Niger in July became the latest economic community of West African states member to undergo a coup when soldiers from the presidential guard detained President Mohamed Bazoum and set up what they called a transitional government. At Sunday's summit in Nigerian capital Abuja, ECOWAS decided to set up a committee of leaders from Togo, Sierra Leone and Benin to engage the Niger junta to agree on a short transition roadmap and work towards the speedy restoration of constitutional order. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu said ECOWAS should be prepared to provide military juntas with technical and material support to achieve transition goals. ECOWAS has imposed a series of economic sanctions on the juntas, which are hurting the poor and should be removed. Delegates at the COP28, a UN climate conference in Dubai, have approved a fund to assist developing nations in dealing with the damaging effects of climate change. This fund aims to aid countries, particularly in Africa, affected by climate-related disasters such as floods, droughts, and rising sea levels. VOA's Paul Ndiho spoke to Frank Tumusime, a senior researcher at Advocates for Natural Resources and Development in Uganda, which is a critical juncture regarding oil exploration.
It's part of the process of mitigation and adaptation to climate change, because the COP28 in itself is not an end to solving climate change. Yes, the key theme was setting up a fund to help decarbonize, especially with the global south, in most cases the least emitters, because I think Africa emits about 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And then we know that petroleum, oil, gas, and mining, the extractive sector, contribute 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So Africa is way not there at all.
Lately, for example, we've had floods that have killed a lot of people from Somalia to Kenya to Uganda and most recently Tanzania. A couple months ago, we saw hundreds of thousands of people die in Libya because of these floods, and partly attributed to climate change. What do you think needs to be done to make sure that some of this funding that was agreed upon help Africans maybe tackle some of these problems?
First of all, there are some structural challenges within our system and society. You see, the first question is debt management and also avoiding bureaucracy. In simple terms, is that decision-making in such big monies is key. And red tape kills decision-making. And so there's a push from people who have given money, the government partners, but decisions are not being made, and money is not going down to benefit whom it's supposed to benefit.
Uganda is now, I guess, on the cutting edge of producing oil. You talked about how there's been an environmental impact. They have a need here where they want to basically maybe build this oil and petroleum industry so that they can create jobs for their own people. But at the same time, they're dealing with a lot of challenges when it comes to environmental protection.
Africa has about 40% of the global oil, gas, and mining resources that are not yet explored. Africa has just started, so that there's this argument that, look, let's first carbonize just like you did, then we shall decarbonize. And so that's why you see we have a refinery process taking shape. We have the East African crude oil pipeline taking shape in order to prepare and fast up the revenues. Then from there, it is assumed that there will be clean technologies in the oil extraction, refining, and transportation process. Then the money, some of it will be used to support the clean energy transition. However, as we said, the danger is the fossil fuel industry contributes big time, 70% to the greenhouse gas emissions. So it is a rather sustainable development. Can we conserve? Can we have oil out of the ground, extract, transport it sustainably? Is that possible? Well, when you look at the energy transition plan that has been, Uganda has launched, there is commitment to exploit our oil resources in a sustainable way.
That was Frank Tumusime, a senior researcher at Advocates for Natural Resources and Development in Uganda, speaking to VOA's Paul Ndiho. We'd like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, a Kenyan healthcare entrepreneur gets reprieve after banks turned her away. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
In other news, Kenya Airways has told its customers to be prepared for potential disruptions to its flight schedule during the busy Christmas holiday season due to shortages of spare parts. The carrier, one of the biggest in Africa, said the lack of parts, which is affecting the global supply chain, would disrupt flights for about 2 weeks. The Sudanese army and the rival paramilitary force it has been fighting for 8 months have both cast doubt on an announcement by regional mediators that they had committed to a ceasefire and political dialogue. IGAD, a group of East African nations, has sought along with the United States and Saudi Arabia to mediate an end to the conflict, which has killed more than 12,000 people. And the UN mission in Mali officially ended a 10-year deployment in the country on Monday. The withdrawal of the UN stabilization mission known as MINUSMA has ignited fears that fighting will intensify between troops and armed factions for territorial control. MINUSMA had for the past decade maintained around 15,000 soldiers and police in Mali. A Kenyan entrepreneur, Esther Muthoni, was turned away by banks twice when she sought financing to save her healthcare business, which was on the brink of collapse. Thanks to a medical credit fund that targets small and medium-sized health institutions, her healthcare business is up and running. Saida Swale has the details.
When Esther Muthoni and her late husband first opened the Zamzam Clinic in 1998, they had a dream to bring affordable healthcare to the people of Ngong Town, southwest of Kenya's capital, Nairobi. What they didn't realize was how much it was going to cost them.
Around 2014, we moved to our current location. It wasn't a smooth move. It was an eviction.
By then, SafeCare, an international organization that measures the quality and performance of healthcare facilities, had done its assessment of the clinic and declared it in a critical stage.
The improvements they recommended required funding, money that we didn't have because we were not doing business the way it's supposed to be done.
Muthoni needed money and she needed it fast. Patients needed food, utility bills were piling up, and her staff demanded salaries.
There was a time we approached a certain bank. After back and forth for almost 2 months, we were told that we don't qualify for any loans because a hospital is a risky business.
Through the medical credit fund, Muthoni managed to remain afloat.
The cash advance is an easy way of borrowing because I don't need any collateral. All I need is a very active till number. I apply using the phone. The most it takes is about 4 hours and I have the cash.
You don't need to worry about a loan.
Kennedy Okongo, the Medical Credit Fund East Africa Director, says since its inception in 2009 as part of the Farm Access Group, it has disbursed loans worth $180 million.
We've managed to give 6,000 loans in total to over 2,000 health SMEs, meaning a majority of them have been able to come back for the loan for more than one time.
We're actually using digital technology developed right here in Kenya to facilitate so that the clinic owner doesn't have to go to the bank but can actually access the loans directly, conveniently through her mobile phone.
We're able to access funds without any collateral, which is so easy for me as a woman. When you have no title deed or a logbook in your name, it's so difficult to get a normal loan. So cash advanced is godsend. You just click your phone and the money is there.
The loans vary from about $1,000 to about $2.5 million. You
must be fully registered as a healthcare provider who's been in operation for a period of time. You must be giving care or doing anything in the health space. It could have been even a nursing school. For example, you're starting a nursing school.
Lizzie Muthoni has received medical care at Zamzam since the 1990s.
What keeps bringing me back here is that we have a good relationship. I pay using my phone, and even when I don't have money, I can always send them the money later.
An inspiring journey by the Zamzam Medical Services caught the attention of Queen Maxima of the Netherlands in her capacity as the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, to learn how the MCF loans drive access to quality care in communities.
These clinics, they have to do so much with so little. So we need to give them more assets and more capacitation so they can actually do a lot more.
Muthoni hopes that in the near future her facility will have the capacity to provide all services so she won't have to refer patients to other hospitals due to lack of equipment. For VOA, I am Saida Swale in Ngong Town, Kenya.
South Africa's Agricultural Business Chamber is calling for the early renewal of the U.S. African Growth and Opportunity Act, known as AGOA. The act allows some products from certain sub-Saharan countries duty-free access to the United States. Vicky Stark reports.
Here at Kunye Farms Packhouse in the Western Cape Province, Siani Kotwano knows he's lucky to have a job in the citrus industry. He started living and working here after he ran out of funds to complete his studies in human resources management. So now, come payday, Kotwano sends money home for his son's education.
I want to work hard, and I mean like harder, so that he can have a bright future. He can build his life the way he wants to build it, because mostly some of us, we didn't have that choice.
The Independent Agricultural Business Chamber's CEO, Theo Boshoff, says jobs like Tsiani's are available thanks to the duty-free access to the U.S. market provided by the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA.
More than half of agricultural, of our sector's GDP in value terms gets exported. In the horticultural sector, it's significantly more than that, upwards of 70% that gets exported.
He says South Africa's citrus exports to the US is an AGOA success story.
So we are on the back of certain trade agreements, such as AGOA, such as the partnership agreement with the EU. We have seen massive plantings in the last 10 years. Many of those have trees and orchards that have been planted are not yet in fruit, bearing fruit, which means there are additional volumes coming.
Boshoff says this translates into jobs. South Africa, with a population of over 60 million people, has an official unemployment rate of over 30%. He says 1.4 million people are currently employed in the primary and secondary agricultural sectors.
Within agriculture, if you look at the industries such as the horticultural sector, the sugar industry, the wine industry, where that accounts, for between them more than half of agricultural employment. These are also the critical sectors that export, especially to the US.
The Agricultural Chamber has stressed the importance of AGOA for South Africa's rural communities and asked the US government to renew the act well before the September 2025 deadline. It says this will give more certainty to buyers and investors. The Agricultural Chamber says South Africa exports roughly $12.8 billion worth of agricultural and agro-processed products annually. Vicky Stark, VOA News, Cape Town, South Africa.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.